is James.
Hello.
Hi, James. And we met when we were training as counsellors. We really wanted a chance to give this space where we can honestly talk about faith and make it okay to talk about faith and spirituality and our processes and experiences with that, where we might be. So welcome, and do message or get in touch after or during if you've got any questions or comments. Faith, James, we were just talking now and we got onto something that seemed really key. So we decided to start
Diving in before we'd even start recording.
Yeah.
Hang on. This is exactly the type of faith and honest conversation that we're going for right now.
Yeah. So you were talking about purpose and things. So let me just hand over to you actually, and you can
I
introduce
was going to say I'll give a bit of framework. So I was saying to you, Tom, about sort of 4 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe now. I can't work it out. After we've reached 2020, everything kind of shifts because my maths goes out the window.
Before you were 30.
Before I was 30, my life started to implode, explodes, cascades, disintegrate. All of these fun words that we can use to describe. I suppose a midlife crisis, or as Erickson would put it, a life crisis, which was certainly an element of it. So I was attending a church. I was part of a community group where we had a house that was a community house, and I was living there as in-house support, living and looking after people with a variety of needs, including substance misuse, homelessness, mental health disorders, and mental health issues, and like a whole host of other things going on. And I wasn't earning a huge amount of money at the time, but it felt all right because that really felt. Even to go further back than that, I'd felt a real calling from God when I just after I'd come to faith or had like a faith experience back in my early 20s, of God saying, James, I want you to build my house in this city, and not really understanding what God meant, but going, yeah, of course, why wouldn't I do that? Why wouldn't I want to be involved or do what you've asked me to? So, and this really felt this project really felt like that's manifesting, like that coming into being. So in amongst all of that, the church I was a part of started to discuss or was challenged on its approach to the LGBT community, because we had people in the church and part of the church, and I expect this is probably true of a lot of churches, whether they know it or not, that they were part of the congregation, and then as their expression of that became more visible, then the church became less tolerant or less okay with it all, and as a result, we went on what was euphemistically called the journey to sort of approach and talk about this. What it actually turned out was the journey was a way for the leadership or the majority of the leadership of the church to impose its view on the part of the congregation or the part of the church that didn't agree or had a differing approach to, or in that instance a more accepting and inclusive approach to people who are in the LGBT community. As a result, the whole sort of church had a real difficulty navigating this. A lot of people left. A lot of people got very hurt. A lot of people probably have left church, maybe not to return. A lot of people went to other churches. A lot of people did stay. So the church is now about a quarter of the size that it was, and it was very sort of destructive in the way it kind of happened. But I'm sure that God is in it, and there's good stuff that's happening now. Just to give a bit of like reassuring closure to all of that, that it's moving forwards in quite a positive way, in now a much more inclusive um, way towards everybody, not just people in who are LGBT, but people of all um, types and all, anybody who claims to be human. I think is the approach they're taking, which I quite like. I'm not, as I was saying to you earlier, not enticed to go back, and it's not like a place I'd feel particularly comfortable being associated with or being part of. But at the same time, I'm now quite pleased that they're heading in that direction, and my own foibles, if you like, are centered more around like power dynamics and issues of what I'm wary of with churches and any places where there's uh, organized religion. I think is maybe part of my issue. I don't know. Maybe
Any
that's
sort of organized religious group or organized group, probably it will probably come up in many ways.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's hard for me. I think there are other factors which I'll go into now, which include the place where I was living, sort of simultaneously to this big explosion that's happening with the church. That became like a backdrop or a background to my own life, going into a bit of a spiral, because I reached a point of burnout with the lifestyle I was living, whereas just trying to do too much and give too much and not really allowing me to be fed or rest or any of like the things that are really important for us as humans to have in order to keep going. So um, I've been living in this community house for about 5 or 6 years, and there'd been really good support and like a good level of people there who were there to in the intention was that they were there as supporting members of like the people who are like helping the house to be a community, um, and including people and bringing people in, and there was quite a good balance of that against people who were more in need of help. So I don't want to. That feels like really wishy washy, but for me that's quite significant that I didn't, and in my head that I didn't define it as being people needing help and people helping,
Yeah,
but that was
get that.
essentially what it was.
Yeah.
And then gradually, as the house developed, as the organisation moved forwards, it became much more people needing help and fewer people helping, until it was essentially me and a lot of people who needed help, and me feeling quite responsible for all of that. There were other people like on the periphery who didn't necessarily live in the house, but I was feeling quite a weight of responsibility and a weight of of expectation, which I wasn't really up to, and as a result, reached this sort of like crisis of personality and faith as well. So it was, I just very abruptly stopped, moved out, and said to the lady who's managing the house and essentially overseeing it alongside me. We were co-directors at the time. Said that I can't carry on. I can't do this anymore, and I need to leave. I need to get out. She totally understood, and like, I don't know if I've ever told her how grateful I am that she said that, rather than say, "Well, you can't leave." I think that this story would have had a very much more different outcome if I hadn't been able to get her to
Yeah.
have that escape. So I left, and then went to stay for a couple of weeks with two friends of mine. Interestingly enough, they were the couple who were now married, who had been part of like that spark, that catalyst for the church going through this dramatic metamorphosis. So that was quite like a nice dramatic narrative irony that sort of kind of fits with the whole thing. And they really looked after me. They loved me more than I could have hoped, and just let me be me, which I don't think I'd ever had before, and probably haven't had quite to the same extent since. But I had a really profound impact on me. Just letting me be me and do what I needed to do, and not have any expectation or pressure or need to be or do anything else. And for me, that I don't know if I've ever experienced that level of it being so much like the way God loves us as that. And I guess that's a big part of why I'm very, very pro LGBT. I'm very pro. Well, I was very pro before that, but having had that experience, I can't. It really. I feel really challenged when people think that people in the LGBT community can't express God's love for whatever reason, or can't be an expression of God's love, because it was such a pure experience of God's love for me there. That's kind of a bit of a sidetrack. But
it feels like that might be tied to being LGBT, like something in that whole experience of being othered or being different, or and yeah, I don't know, that then forges God's love in that relationship, maybe.
Yeah, I really love that, and I think that there is a part of that. If you've been rejected and been cast out, then you can totally relate in a way, in a really profound way, to those who are feeling that way and are able to express love and acceptance and joy with people, and care for people and compassion. Maybe in a different way, and I don't think it's exclusively that for people who've experienced it in the LGBT community, but I think that it comes down to like the wounded healer, the whole. I read somewhere recently that there being two different ways of dealing with hurt. Either you go on to hurt, or you go on to heal. Like your approach to people is like, because I'm hurting, I want to make people feel that pain, or because I'm hurting, I don't want people to feel that pain.
Yeah.
And so for me, there was this real sense, and I was talking to my partner last night about how I feel adrift now, or not necessarily adrift, but tethered, or trapped now, because there was this sense of like really fulfilling my purpose, really going in the right direction and doing what I was supposed to be doing, which led to this catastrophic breakdown, essentially, of who I was and where I was, and my whole lifestyle, to being sort of like, now I go to work, I work part-time because I've got this awareness that my mental health is more precious than earning money or working. So I'm really guarded about what I take on now. I'm really guarded with what I say yes to. And I'm now doing stuff much more for me, and allowing that to go on and spread to other people as and when and how it can. but there's still this pressure within myself and this sense within myself of I suppose purposelessness. That's quite hard to say. Lack of drive, lack of motivation, lack of direction or movement that is difficult to reconcile, difficult to sit with, I suppose. So I think that's basically brought the listener up to speed of where we were in our conversation with
That's
a
great.
few added extras.
Yeah.
Just gone in. Give me a moment. I'm just going to put the light on. Sorry, it's very dark in here. Carry on.
That's right.
Yeah.
So yeah, like a few things really struck me with that was one, just you're not the first person I've come across who have really needed a real safe space to go at the crux of a burnout. And I think it's so amazing that for some people is provided or is found. And it sounds just like that safe holding space to be. Just seems so. It's just so in contrast to how life was experienced that was causing the burnout. Like all the pressures and pulls and everything. So yeah, that really struck me. The other thing that really struck me was this this call of God to build His house, and in this city, and lots of images came around in that, and like the drive now feels very different. The lack of drive feels very different to the real. It felt like you were doing things, with the community living, very active, and I'm just thinking many thoughts on like, do houses need to be taken down before they can be built? And is there something about this couple's house being the house of God? And is there something about is God's house built in us? Much more than in something else's or somebody else's mission. And how much more, can we think of God's house being built, like many of God's houses being built in cities, rather than this church, this mission being the house? And maybe it's both, it probably is all of the above.
I think when I first sort of like had I suppose it was a vision or like a dream like kind of experience, but it was very vivid and I was definitely not asleep when it happened. But when I did go through a real period of questioning and going, well, what does that look like, and what does he mean, and how does that sort of fit, and spoke to a lot of people, and I think I suppose that the further I've got on, that I still feel like yes, the greenhouse was a part of that, but more than that, it is a more of an internal spiritual place of sanctuary in me, which then I share with people, and that door is open to people. Maybe I guess I think that's probably the first time I put that into words, really, with regards to that. But yeah, it definitely feels quite new and quite reassuring that it's not it's not dependent on any physical structure or any physical place. Um, yeah, it becomes suddenly much less of a me doing it, but God doing it in me, and me allowing it rather than a yeah.
It's like you're participating in
Yeah,
God's building.
yeah, joining in with it rather than a, you know, driving it forwards myself, and
Yeah.
that being it. That's it's funny because that's always been a struggle of mine and we talked about this before on this where I struggle to initiate stuff or make things happen myself and be the driving force, and I will quite frequently collaborate with people or join in with what somebody else is doing rather than this is what I want to do, this is where I want to go. Yeah, so that's quite different. A very different place this morning from where I was last night. I feel like loads more positive about it. And yeah, last night I was like, where am I going? What am I doing? It's sort of very fatalistic sort of approach to it all.
Yeah, I have this real. I can't remember if you said it now or in our conversation before, but you talked about the church, and kind of being on fire. Like if a building's on fire, you get out and you take other people with you, and it, like, the church is called the house of God as well, and just like I think I'd lean, or I like to interpret these. So maybe it's some of my own stuff, but I like to interpret these sorts of things as, like, maybe the fire is God's building his house. That in our spiritual and our faith journeys, I think there needs to be times when we're on fire or when it's all crumbling down, which makes space for something new, or and that is going on in my head of just and also, that's also, I guess, a metaphor for maybe what's going on inside you, like a lot of your own kind of constructs of faith burning down, and that, like, faith house inside you. And I think for me, like, it can be very linked like that. Like, I know in my story, like, church was such a part of my faith, and being part of church and what it stood for was it was like I had a little mini church inside me that was a replica, and it's kind of like that needs to be okay, and it's only okay if the church outside me is okay. And but actually, that maybe that needed to be taken down to for the real building to start being built. So I guess, all this kind of dismantling, this deconstruction, can that be part of the building?
Yeah. Oh, I definitely agree, and I think the thing that was sort of coming to mind, you're right, that analogy of like the burning down and so on. There's something quite cleansing about fire, and it's often used as a metaphor in the Bible as such, as a like the cleansing fire and so on, and refining fire. But more than that, there's when I think of like the tree analogy that we went into quite a lot of depth this the last couple of weeks.
We loved it. We loved it.
We do like that. When I think of how fire relates to trees and growth and so on, it's usually considered really devastating. And yes, there is an element of that. But when a volcano erupts and covers the land in ash and it kills everything or destroys everything, it provides incredibly fertile ground for new growth to happen. But that doesn't happen immediately. There has to be a time of cooling. There has to be a time of settling. And then you get sequoia trees which need fire to. I can't remember what it is, but it's to allow I think it's for their seeds to open for
Oh, really?
their pine cone, because they're of the pine family. They're evergreen, and I think it opens the their pine cones and allows the seeds to go. It also clears away a lot of the brush underneath, leaving space for the new sequoias to grow. And it can't happen, and like so the sequoia forests won't get any bigger unless there are regular forest fires, unless there are regular, and they obviously can't be so big that they're going to take out the whole forest, but
Yeah.
they've got to be, there's an element of cleansing, an element of clearing to that. And yeah, and the whole, after something's been torn down, you've got a space. There is, and anything could grow in that, anything could be built in that, anything could happen there.
And that feels so different from the construct of building. I remember, or I feel, is part of a lot of Christian groups. That, like, we're built. There's this. Like, we're building into a church. We're building into this plan and this,
Mm.
and it's progress at every point.
Linear,
It's like
yeah.
linear, yeah,
Measurable, yeah. Yeah.
measurable, maybe by numbers or maybe by how much ministries we're doing or things
Mm.
like that.
Mm.
And like fires or dismantlings, or when something has to stop or isn't working, like these feel like such failures or such
Setbacks.
setbacks. And it's like, oh, this is the devil coming in,
Mm.
or or we should be trying harder, or
Mm.
all this sort of thing, or we just need to be doing that. And actually how different that metaphor is of, maybe we need regular dismantling and regular fires and regular
Mm.
clearing in order for the forest to grow.
Mm. Yeah.
And I guess in my own life, in my own personal journey, I've thought, oh well, if I can just get past this phase of deconstruction, then
Mm.
life will be okay. Maybe I've got to be here for a while, but I
Yeah.
can see a future ahead.
Mm.
And like, maybe I don't.
Mm.
Maybe I've got to keep going into the deconstruction, keep
Maybe
going
it's
into.
deeper. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's more, I guess, it's the more circular or cyclical sort of path where you keep going back, but it deepens somehow, or it
Yeah. That's it.
gets wider or something.
Yeah, expands the growth. You incorporate more into it, or like within you, your own sort of forest is growing, and it's sort of coming out of a place of, and it becomes more natural and a more more verdant space, a more still. Yeah, and I love like the whole, when you've got a garden, or when you've got like a wild space, and it feels like a wild space, that that there is just more of it, and there's more to explore, and that feels much healthier to me than it being a palace or a building or a construct within me. And when I think of God, when I think of like, and we talked about this as well, like the some people experiencing God through nature, some people experiencing God um, through sort of like prayer and silence and contemplation, all the different uh, ways to pray, or ways to experience God. That I don't, the parts of the Bible I really don't relate to are when it's talking about God's majesty in relation to like gold and silver and jewels and all of this sort of stuff, and I'm like, it just doesn't do it for me. It's just like meh, meh, just bits of metal and bits of stone. Whereas when it comes to like looking at a tree or looking at a plant and thinking about the complexity there, and the intricacies and the links and the bonds and stuff. I've got a background in chemistry, so knowing that's so
Wait,
much.
how did I not know this, James?
Oh,
Sorry,
okay.
I really wanted you to go on, but I'm just having a moment of what's your
Well,
history of chemistry?
okay, so long in the long ago, before before I was Catholic, before I went to church or anything like that. After I finished school, I went to university and I
Yep.
studied chemistry and archaeology
Oh
as a dual honours
wow.
degree. Um, Absolutely fascinating. Loved it to bits. Absolutely hated chemistry at school. Like really not
Yeah.
interested. My dad's a physical chemist. Was a physical chemist, retired now. My mum's a biochemist, again retired
Okay.
now. My older sister's a marine biologist, and my younger sister's a marine biologist. So there's a little bit of a leaning towards sciences,
Mm.
particularly like the hard sciences, um, which at least half of me completely rejects and completely rebels against, and the other part of me finds real beauty and really loves it and really
Yeah.
loves like that this is real, like you can that there's sort of ancient scholars and ancient scientists. The whole point of science was how can we understand God better, how can we see
Mm.
God better
Mm.
and understand his creation and understand
Mm.
what he's done, and there's a real beauty to that. So, um, and a recognition, well, we're wrong about most stuff. Like, let's get a bit better at understanding, and every time we learn something new, the next
Mm.
generation goes on to disprove that and say, well, they were partly right, but actually this is
Yeah.
what's true. And then the next generation says, well, they were partly right, but
Yeah.
actually this is true.
Yeah.
And
It's a
it's all
lovely image of science. It very
exactly,
spins it on the common conception, doesn't it? But
yeah. And there's a
science says
create
we're wrong at the moment, but
we're wrong.
the
Yeah,
next.
but this is the best. This is the best answer we've got so
Yeah.
far.
Yeah.
And I really love that. And I think that when we look at faith in that perspective, and faith in that sort of, when we look at, so for me, metals are really boring because they're uniform. Like when it comes to gold or silver, but particularly when they're pure,
Mm.
and the Bible talks about like purified metal and purified gold and all of this sort of stuff. It's really dull
Really
because it's really dull because the only element you've got there is gold.
It's
Gold is an
gold.
element, it's a
Yeah.
chemical element. When it's in its purest form, and usually it will be in a purer form because it's very unreactive. It doesn't do very
Mm.
much. It's
Mm.
inert. It's really boring, but it's very, very, very rare. So we've attached this real value,
Yeah.
oddly, to this metal. And you just think, well, I don't know, okay.
Yeah.
But then when you look at things like plants and you look at the way they grow, or like complex molecules, like any organic, and I when I was studying, hated organic chemistry, loved inorganic. Inorganic
Mm.
is real simple, real like the
Yeah.
boring stuff which I've just talked about, and inorganic is this really complex, really sort of like crazy reactions happening. It's almost exclusively to do with carbon,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
what the majority of humans are made up of, and the majority of
Yeah.
life forms are made up of. So
I
it's a
find it fascinating that you've gone from chemistry and archaeology, so kind
yeah,
of, and inorganic chemistry, so kind of
yeah,
simple and also man-made stuff,
yeah, yeah,
into loving woodlands,
yeah.
and loving,
Right.
like it's very
There's a
nature.
real
Yeah.
dichotomy in me.
Yeah.
I'm aware that I'm a bit of a contradiction of different things, and also this whole going from a chemistry and archaeology, which is sort of rooted in a scientific approach. Well, certainly like modern day archaeology has a bit of a blend of everything, of looking at what does the evidence tell us, and then what can we infer, and
Mm.
what can we take from that, and what can we look at current cultures and the way we live, and what we do, and try and look at it through and recognition of lenses. So there's
Yeah.
a
Okay.
sort of socio sociology approach to it,
Yeah.
socio psychology, socio psychology
Yeah.
approach. Um, and then going into counselling, which has that element, and more than, and in fact, in counselling, we really don't look at the whole scientific. We recognise that maybe there are things going on neurologically for people that maybe you need to speak to a doctor, speak to a neurologist, speak to a psychologist about. But ultimately, it's what's the lived experience, what's the what do we see, and what is that person experiencing, and it being very qualitative rather than that very distinctly quantitative. So yeah, there's a real blend of stuff going on for me,
Yeah.
and it might,
No,
it might pass.
and it feels like all part of the same story of
Yeah,
like
they're not disparate. Yeah.
this movement from the house of God as church and this outside house
Mm,
to the house of God inside, maybe,
mm,
and kind of maybe it's like not a palace but it's a forest, um, and science is giving answers to science being our
mm,
best answer at the moment in a certain lens.
yeah.
Like they're all movements, aren't they, to um
I
I don't
think
know.
where it
Yeah.
come to is acceptance, is a place of
Yeah.
acceptance
Okay.
that
Yeah.
that we're,
Yeah.
you know, the way we are is the way we are now, but it doesn't. We're not going to stay like this. There's an element of growth there, and there's an element of
Yeah.
movement and breathing,
Yeah.
and yeah, this yeah
Yeah.
fluidity to it,
Yeah.
rather than
Yeah.
static. Mm.
I think what in that is, you're talking about gold being really simple,
Mm,
really
mm.
boring,
I
but
realise
it's
I've offended a lot of people by saying it's really boring. There's
yeah,
a lot of stuff that gold can do.
I
There's a
know,
reason we
but
use it.
I'm just thinking of that, but that being rare, and so it's really valuable. Like I'm sure
Mm,
it's really useful in many ways as well, and it
mm,
is.
mm,
But something about the rareness, and actually maybe there's a movement here of what's really valuable isn't maybe, what's really valuable slash the treasure slash the inklings of God or the
mm,
sparks of God. Maybe that's not so rare.
mm.
If the house of God is being built in each of us, maybe there's many houses of God,
Yeah,
and it's not just found in this one place.
yeah. It's not
Um,
as rare as it is. Yeah, as we thought. Yeah,
and
yeah.
that sort of acceptance or
Mm,
appreciation of more, and I'm just thinking, linking that back to our forest idea that gets bigger, and
mm,
um, when you said the word majesty, I was thinking, well, that forest can get quite majestic,
mm, mhm.
in its own in in a pretty amazing way.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I guess so all that's going on, and then I'm like, well, maybe with your story, maybe what God has been doing is building a really majestic forest.
Yeah,
Like there's a really wideness now
yeah. The
from
scale.
which so much growth can happen, or so
Mm,
much,
mm,
um, and that's quite different from the narrowness where I've just got to go upwards in this way,
mm,
or I've got to build this house because that's the plan. Like that's a
mm,
different sort of way, but there's so much potential, or so much emerging and breaking
mm.
out. And yeah, am I making sense?
Yeah,
Is that
totally, totally.
resonating? Yeah.
And I think that's sort of what I was alluding to is the when I read about like the majesty of God being related to something more constructed, or like a construct of us
Yeah.
as
Yeah. Yeah.
humans of what we perceive as majestic, and what we like associate of, like, crowns and that sort of stuff, and it just doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but then when, yeah, as exactly as you say, just by just looking at the intricacies of the bark of a tree, and
Mm.
then knowing that that is just a very small part, and in fact an external part of this incredible um, uh, being, thing that's living
Mm.
thing, that is the whole tree, and then realizing that then that is a very, very small part. That tree is a very, very small part of the entire forest and in the entire living world. And what else goes on in and around? That's majesty for me. That's sort of knowing that on like the microscopic level, there are things going on that we can't even see and don't even understand yet fully, or we understand on a tiny amount. And then it goes, and you keep going, and you kind of feel really small in the face of the universe. And yeah, that's where I get majesty. That's where it that feeling of wow, I'm tiny, and that's really good that I'm tiny.
Tiny and yet connected.
Yeah, part of,
Like
part of,
part of it.
involved in, yeah, and not divorced from, but yeah, recognition, and I think that's why it's the tiny but good, because like you could feel tiny and insignificant and not relevant, but when you realise that you're tiny, and although you may be perceived as being insignificant, the fact you exist is relevant. Like you have an impact, you have the power to make differences and make changes, and I think that I'm probably talking myself into, oh, it's all right. It's okay to feel like you haven't got direction. You still make a difference. You still have an influence just by being, just by existing. And I think that's where I always come to whenever I get into these sort of funk states of mind where I feel a little bit purposeless. That just by existing, just by breathing, just by just doing me, just being me, makes a difference.
Yeah. And I think for me that's where God is in that.
Yeah.
And it's like all of the journey, but we don't like it, but all of that has been maybe making you bigger, so that you can hold more, accept more, embrace more, kind of, and be present more with people, like be that sort of life-giving to people that you're around, just like a forest is able to be that just by being present. I don't know.
Available to people, isn't it? It's like I see what you mean. It's allowing yourself allowing those connections to be there without having to without having to sort of like really strive for anything, or really like push, or like, oh, I have to grow in this way for people to experience or love the forest. No, that people love forests. It's going to be okay. It doesn't matter kind of what you look like. How you
and if they don't love forests, maybe it's their fault.
Well, this is it. They still need forests because they're providing the oxygen. So it's necessity. Yeah, really interesting. I think, really interesting. It's a good place. I think I'm definitely in a better place than I was yesterday with it. It's quite encouraging.
Yeah. And there's also that side of, okay, God might be doing something in this church as well, and God might be, and maybe this forest needs pruning. I don't know what the metaphor is, but maybe there is things as well.
As I'm sure you know, with Baptist churches, the approach is let's all listen to God together and see what He's saying, particularly in the church meeting context. Context, yeah. Contest, yeah, that may be a Freudian
the
slip.
Church meeting contest. I love that. Who can listen to God the hardest?
We've really been listening this year. Anyway, in the church meeting context, and one of the words that somebody got was we're going through a time of pruning, and that was just before and leading into the sort of like very very heavy pruning session that
thanks God.
Thanks God. It was very much, and I don't know anything really about roses, only that they do, that people who keep them, they, as far as I know, they do go through quite a severe pruning session, after the season, after the race season. I think. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah, people who keep roses will know better than me. But and so you cut down like this incredible bush, this incredible right that back, and you think, oh, have you just killed it? But no, it's still there, and it comes right back the next season, and so on. In fact, usually better because it's been pruned. You get better growth, better flowers in it. Yeah.
And I'm really aware that that's again that sort of season cycle. Like there are seasons for pruning and seasons for collapsing almost.
Yeah.
But I'm also really aware that just how like that that's so counter to our culture, particularly kind of Christian cultures and church cultures where it's all building and things, often all building, can seem like that. But also, like, what am I saying? Maybe we're scared of really embracing this because we don't quite know how to answer the problem of evil or the problem of suffering.
Yeah.
Like it feels like, are we then saying suffering is just God's way of pruning? And so, are we meeting the real pain that's happening in all this burning?
And what are we doing with that? Are we dismissing it, or are we minimizing or negating it in some ways? And and how does that fit? And what about you can see man's inhumanity to man manifest all over the world and in all sorts of different ways, but how does that fit?
And I don't want to I think what I'm thinking at the moment is maybe we don't like this talk because we don't have an answer to this. Like it makes us really uncomfortable.
Sure.
That this could be part of how God builds his house. Like that active building of house rather than God letting it happen. But even if God letting it happen, we still say God's in control, so that's not quite sorted anything. So but yet this feels so freeing or so much more hopeful and real than the ever progress towards perfection or whatever it is.
I don't know. I wonder if maybe I'm just like aware time wise, like that this is potentially like a huge sort of opening, a place where we can go. But maybe we start next time with pain as our word of choice, as the place where we start from.
Not often a word of choice, is it?
Not usually.
Or a chosen thing, anyway.
Well, I'm sure, there's probably like a whole host of things that have been written about it and so on. But certainly good to discuss and good to sort of think about and work out.
And pain, spiritual pain, I guess, is pain in this faith that we have. Can almost be harder sometimes that it strikes deeper somehow. I think that makes sense, James, to potentially leave it for next week. So have you got anything left for this week from what we've said?
No, I think it's been good. It's good that I've surprised you a couple of times with the things I've said, which means that I've definitely not talked about them before, and I've got a great memory for these things. But it kind of gives some context to where I'm at, I suppose, and it's good. I think I've said everything that I need to say for the time being, and that's more I can say, obviously. But nothing that's coming to mind.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us. Thanks, James, for
pleasure.
Yeah, I love our conversations. It's just great where we get to and what sparks and how deep we go is really lovely. And do let us know if you want us to explore anything or if you've got any comments. That would be great to hear. that's us. So take care, everyone.
Mm.